This is the Aunty and Brain Tumours talk show. It's a show full of informative chat and inspirational messages. The Aunty and Brain Tumours talk show on podcast.
So before I was diagnosed, I had recently married the love of my life. I had started essentially my dream job. So life was looking pretty idyllic. I was probably in the best shape of my life. I had really, committed to staying in good shape because at that time I was 28 and I thought, well, my metabolism isn't going to be, amazing for forever. And then it was February 13th of 2020. I went to the gym, and as I was walking through the gym, I picked up my left foot and I had this very odd sensation and then felt like I was falling backwards, but I had no recollection of ever hitting the floor. And then I woke up and I had all these people from the gym around me. They were telling me that I had had a grand mal seizure and that EMS and my husband were on the way. I was obviously very confused. I was in the hospital for 2 days and they were running, basically any and every test they could to try to figure out what was going on. And at one point they came into the room and they gave me IV Keppra and they explained that it was an anti-seizure medication. And at the time, I just had a seizure. That made perfect sense to me. That led to the brain tumor. The doctor assured me that the tumor was actually benign. It would be simple to remove, and I probably wouldn't need any treatment after that, which I was, of course, overjoyed to hear. But I wanted to go get a second opinion. So I went to get a second opinion, and that doctor, who was much more experienced and more renowned than the initial doctor that I saw, told me that no, this was not a benign tumor. And because it was in my motor cortex, they would like for me to be awake during the surgery, because if not, there was a risk of paralyzing my left side. And I really like using my left side. So I elected to go with that surgeon and undergo the awake craniotomy. So when they took me into surgery, they sedated me first, and then they woke me up during the course of surgery. And I will never forget this as long as I live. I was in the middle of having a dream where my brother, Taylor, and I were riding in a car somewhere. And that's when they woke me up, right in the middle of that dream. So I went from having, a very idyllic, time with my brother to waking up in the OR and they have all the sheets draped over you so that you can't see anything. And it was definitely a shock. My heart rate shot up. I thought I wouldn't be that way since I had prepared myself as best as I could before surgery. But they were able to calm me down pretty quickly and then keep going on with the surgery. And then they had some individual, I don't know if he was a resident or if he was, what his job was, but he was sitting at the edge or the end of the tunnel that they sort of created with the sheets. And I had my left arm, held out on a table. And he just told me the whole time, different movements to do with my left hand and my left arm to make sure that when they were, poking around in there, that they weren't hitting anything that would damage my ability to move on my left side. When you're actually woken up and you're in that scene, it's obviously different than anything that you picture in your mind. But I'm still very grateful that I did that. And once they, I was able to calm down, it was honestly not, it really wasn't bad. I felt pretty calm. They had someone talking to me the whole time. And even when they would ask me to do something with my left arm and I couldn't do it, they immediately relayed that feedback back to the surgeon and he pulled back, and then I was able to immediately get feeling back again. So while the few times that happened, it was definitely nerve-wracking, they changed course pretty quickly. And so I didn't get, incredibly overwhelmed with the stress in the moment because it was pretty short lasting. The funniest part for me was that, I heard the surgeon, say, I'm finished. We're going to close her up and, take her up to wherever they take you after you're finished operating. And so I I breathed a sigh of relief because I thought, okay, this part is over. And then I heard the surgeon talking with someone else, and the surgeon came back and said, actually, we're going to keep her awake. It will be better for her to stay awake for her recovery. No one had ever told me that that was something that they could potentially choose to do. And and so they told me that, and I'm strapped to the table. My head is in the halo. I'm like, well, I don't exactly have an opportunity to say no because what am I going to do, right? So yeah, they kept me awake while they, put Humpty Dumpty back together again. They told me that things went really well after the operation. I asked the surgeon, if he could, you know, give an estimate or approximation as to how much of the tumor they got, and he said close to somewhere between 90 to 95%. And so I was thrilled. I thought that was, I would have loved to have heard that they'd gotten it all, but 90 to 95% sounded pretty good to me. So I was very happy with that result after surgery, really. They let me go home after 24 hours. I couldn't believe it. So I thought that was miraculous. So I had gone into a clinical trial for a drug called vorasidenib. Um, I went into that trial about a year and a half after my initial surgery because it was available to me. They were taking people who had had surgery and had had no other interventions like chemotherapy or radiation for a grade 2 astrocytoma. And so I fit all of the parameters. And thankfully, my neuro-oncologist was one of the lead people on the study. And so she got me in. But once I got in, it was a double blind study. So she didn't know if I was taking the active drug or the placebo. And of course, I didn't know. And so then whenever we found out that my tumor had started growing at a faster rate, they unblinded me from the study, and I had been receiving the placebo, and then I got to start receiving the active drug. I was so glad about that. And it's proven to be really effective for me. It's actually shrank my tumor by about a third, which is incredible. I never thought that it would go so far as to shrink it by that much. And so I think I got really, really lucky to have, as much as I wish I didn't have the diagnosis, I got really lucky in terms of when I got it so that I could have access to this drug to help with the tumor. So I had my second seizure in September of 2022 because it seemed like it came out of nowhere. I had had the surgery 2.5 years before. I'd been taking the same seizure medication ever since then, and nothing had happened. And then I was just out on a walk with my husband, and it just came out of nowhere. And so that was concerning. At the time, my doctors just told me, sometimes they call them breakthrough seizures. They can just happen, and we will just up your dosage of Keppra. And so I thought, okay, this is just something that comes with the life of living with a brain tumor. It's fine. We'll just up my meds and I'll be okay again. And so I was navigating how I was going to continue on with my life with what I thought was just going to be 6 months after September of 2022. Well, then in February of 2023, that's when I found out that my tumor had started growing at a much faster rate. And then shortly after that, I had another seizure, and I proceeded to have 4 more seizures over the course of the next, 8 months. And every time I had a seizure, I would go back in to the brain tumor clinic and back to my epileptologist, and we would either do some combination of increasing the dosage of the medication I was on and or adding a medication. And then the only way to know if the seizure medications work for you is to basically take them and then see if you have another seizure, which is incredibly frustrating. It's so frustrating. But that's really all you can do. So that's what I did. And so the combination that we have found now that has kept me seizure free for a year is Fycompa, lamotrigine, and Keppra. So I take all 3 of those. Having children has always been something that my husband and I really wanted. And one of our first questions after my diagnosis and after surgery was, will we still be able to do that? And we were told, yes, we would, but that we should go see some maternal fetal medicine specialists and talk to a few other doctors before we made our decision. And part of that was because I didn't know, this was before I knew how big of a deal the FICOMPA clinical trial was going to be. They had told me I would be on it for probably at least 4 years before the FDA made a decision. And I didn't want to wait 4 years to have a child. And so I was about to not go on the clinical trial. And my doctor really encouraged me to go see a number of professionals before I made that decision. And I'm so glad that she did. The first maternal fetal medicine specialist that I went to see just straight up told me that I should never have children, which it was very, very cut and dry. It felt like a slap to the face. It didn't feel real when he said it. And yeah, I just didn't even know what to do with that because it had never been like previewed to me, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so then I went to see another maternal fetal medicine specialist, and he was so kind. He told me, after reviewing all of my medical records and understanding my condition, he told me that I could carry my own child, but if I chose to do that, I needed to be aware of all of the risks. And he spent an hour walking me through every single risk, the chances of it, and, how he would work together with my neuro-oncologist to minimize those chances, but that those chances of, tumor growth or tumor mutation, or additional seizures, which would cause harm not only to me, but to my child, all of those things were really big risks. And after having those two conversations, my husband and I made a very difficult and probably the hardest decision that, I've ever had to make, which was that, we still wanted to become parents in some way, shape, or form. But in order to do that, I would not be the one to carry our children. And that, far and away, other than, the seizures, beyond the tiredness from all of the drugs and from, post-surgery, that, like, nothing even compares to how big of a blow that was. That's definitely the worst thing for me to come out of this tumor diagnosis. And so that was a really big low point. So whenever we made the decision that I wouldn't carry our children, I immediately began research into both adoption and surrogacy. And obviously with surrogacy, my husband and I would be using our own genetic material to create embryos that someone else would carry one day. And my doctors never said anything, to discourage us from doing that. Because once you make the embryos, they do a lot of testing on them. And while they can't, rule out everything, they can rule out a number of, potential issues with the embryo and how well it would be able to survive and if there are any genetic abnormalities and things of that nature. So I felt very comfortable going into that process. And that's the process that we preferred. And so before I went on to the active drug in the clinical trial, we did preserve embryos. And that was a whole process in and of itself, especially because you have to go basically like every day or every other day for monitoring because you're, giving yourself shots and upping your hormone levels and things of that nature. And I couldn't drive. So God bless my mother-in-law. She's wonderful. She drove me back and forth to all of my appointments. And we were able to successfully get some embryos. And so they are on ice. I really hope to be able to use them soon, but realm has really happened yet. I'm treated it Duke in North Carolina, and they have a wonderful cancer program, not just the Brain Tumor Center, but for all of their cancer programs, and they offer counseling services for free. And so I do have a therapist through there. And it's so great to have someone that works in the cancer clinics because they anticipate the things that I'm going to, need to talk about. And this is not their first time going through these issues with someone. They've had experience with it. They know what resources to offer. It's been fantastic. And I try to have a visit like once every 3 to 4 weeks. She's great. My therapist is great. And she's always providing me with resources for things I can do differently, either to help myself out or to ask better questions of my healthcare providers. I think therapy is hugely important. And I didn't start it immediately. I don't know why I didn't, but ever since I did, it's just been incredible. So yes, go to therapy. It's great. So what I would say to someone who either has just been diagnosed or is, really at any point in their journey is honestly listening to podcasts like this really helped me. Because thankfully, none of my close family and friends are going through, what I'm going through. I've met a few people, but, to really have in-depth conversations with people who know exactly what you're going through, you're just not going to find that with your friends and family, even though they're doing their best to help you and they love you and they do anything for you. It's just hard. It's hard to talk to people who don't fully understand. And so when I listen to podcasts of people sharing their stories, that I found really, really helpful. So thank you for putting on this podcast because it does really help a lot of people. It helped me and it's still helping me. I want to say thank you to the most are my family, both my in-laws and, the family that I grew up with. The amount of support that I've gotten from everyone in those families has been overwhelming and I'm so appreciative of it. But the number one person that I really want to thank is my husband, Pat, because he has always been unwavering in his support. He has never, ever once made me feel like a burden, even though throughout this journey, there have definitely been times where I needed a lot. And he never once has complained, never made me feel like a burden, always picked up whatever slack I wasn't able to pick up. And he knows what I need emotionally without me even having to say it. And I have shed many, many tears, particularly over the not being able to carry our children issue. And he's there and he holds me while I cry. Sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 2 hours. And he doesn't make me explain. He doesn't try to rush me through processing my emotions. He's just there. And I don't know how I got so lucky to have you, Pat. And I'm eternally grateful for you and all of your love.
This is the Aunty and Brain Tumours talk show. It's a show full of informative chat and inspirational messages. The Aunty and Brain Tumours talk show on podcast.